Say NVC New Future Process, Integrated Plan 163 Overview of Implementation Tasks. Several working groups, and subsequently the Integration Council, identified implementation phase tasks during our work over the many months of being engaged in the New Future Process, and this section of the plan lists them. We are not assuming that this section is exhaustive, as we anticipate many more tasks that the Implementation Council will identify as it begins its work. The already identified tasks have been divided into the following categories: bullet startup, tasks necessary for getting NVC 0 up and running, bullet prototyping, a plan for testing out the integrated plan and gathering feedback from experimentation, bullet support, tasks necessary for supporting weaves in functioning at their best, bullet structure, attending to structure and governance elements, including refining and developing operational agreements, bullet systems, establishing systems such as conflict transformation and others, bullet apps, operationalizing aspects of any of the specific applications part of the integrated plan, including initial selection of people to fulfill certain roles, bullet access, attending to multiple tasks related to establishing mechanisms for embedding the principles of creating access and transforming patterns of power and privilege throughout NVCO. Bullet MISC, other tasks that don't fall into any of the other categories. HL1C NVC New Future Process, Integrated Plan 164 Getting NVC 0 up and running decisions, before implementation phase, currently projected to start October 6, 2016. 1. Investigate its options for board transition after legal consultation has completed based on the CNVC transition plan. Considerations for this set of decisions are below, under considerations. Decisions. As implementation phase starts, currently projected to start October 6, 2016. 1. Register an internet domain appropriate for the new name of the organization if different from CNVC. 2. Identify resources for building the virtual home, research options, and initiate the project. 3. Explore whether or not to have a method for an early death for any OA that isn't working. Most likely this task will be passed along to the Global Council after the transition. 4. Research and decide whether to have multiple locations for registering NVC 0 instead of only one outside the US. Determine the legal structures that will support the organization in being able to do things like receive donations and grants, have funds transferred to it from the prior CNVC, have bank accounts, enter into contractual agreements, and so on. Implement these legal structures, for example, file articles of incorporation, etc., as relevant. 5. Establish a task force or advisory board to investigate the legal options for moving forward, then create legal structures, including bank accounts, as needed. 6. Work out with Valentina and others the issue of NTS being offered by any other legal entity. Note from Transition Task Force, as much as possible use relationships more than legalities in attending to transitional issues. 7. Make it a priority to investigate how best to support multilingual meetings so that weaves, especially within the community interface cluster when crossing language barriers at the subcluster level, and the Global Council, can include people who are not fluent in each other's languages. One likely way of doing this is to invite partners to form a weave that will do the necessary research and provide strategies later. 8. Figure out selection of Global Council members for weave clusters. 9. Support the establishment of a weave to attend to the first global convention, initially a global weave until a community interface weave within a continent is strong enough to attend to it is established. H2-1. 10. Design some way to mark the launching the new version of NVCO, party, ritual, both, or something else. 11. Attend to functions released by CNVC and passed to Implementation Council. See Plan for CNVC Transition. 12. Figure out what to do with the current train of fee requests for 2017 and beyond. See considerations within the CNVC Transition Plan. 13. Financial management and planning. Attend to financial aspects of the CNVC Transition Plan as they affect NVCO. B. Decide which aspects of the resources plans are essential for initial functioning, and flesh them out. Note, in support of its deliberations in this area, the Implementation Council may wish to investigate existing proposals and thoughts in the folder that contains documents for the Implementation Council to consider. 14. Decide which systems or parts within them are essential for initial functioning, and take actions necessary for establishing them. Suggestions for consideration regarding board transition. In its deliberations about board transition, the Implementation Council may want to explore the following options. none of which are endorsed or rejected by the CNVC Transition Task Force. 1. The Implementation Council could appoint 3 of its members to serve on the CNVC governance weave. Note, the concern about this option is that it is possible that this would be seen as requiring those members to split their attention between CNVC governance and Implementation Council work in a way that would not be desirable. 2. The Implementation Council could choose the strategy of selecting 3 people not from the Implementation Council to be members of the CNVC governance weave. The selection criteria for such members would include previous familiarity with the new future process. Familiarity with CNVC operations is a plus, and a commitment to supporting implementation of the integrated plan. 3. The Implementation Council could choose the strategy of technically becoming the CNVC board, while delegating most CNVC governance issues to a temporary CNVC governance weave, or even, initially, to the members of the current CNVC board to manage. This would work as follows. The CNVC board would appoint the members of the Implementation Council to the CNVC board, and then resign, themselves, as board members. The Implementation Council would then appoint the previous CNVC board members to a temporary CNVC governance circle, or, if ready to do so, support the formation of a CNVC governance weave composed of people selected as described above. The Implementation Council would, as the technical CNVC board, charge the CNVC governance weave with managing the governance of CNVC, granting it full authority to do so except reserving certain powers to the board, such as the authority to allocate funds reserved for NVCO, or any other duties that the board itself H2-2 166 would be legally obligated to address. This arrangement would be temporary, as long as seemed necessary to the Implementation Council until a fully constituted CNVC governance weave could function as the CNVC board. Suggestions for consideration regarding weaves. Although weaves will emerge as willingness exists within NVCO, some specific weaves may have significant relevant function that will support the NVC0 structure in materializing. The Implementation Council may want to consider supporting the formation of such weaves. Funding. The following thinking is included here in order not to lose work done in earlier phases of the new future process that didn't find its way into the work product of any working group. There are 2 core purposes that could potentially be served by establishing funding weaves as soon as possible after the integrated plan is ratified. 1. Support NVC0 during the transition period. A newly established funding weave can have, as its core task, designing a system of funding that is consistent with the intentions of the integrated plan. Specifically, A. Principles, I. Attention to power and resources, and, specifically, attending to differential access to resources at the following levels. 1. Varying degrees of access to resources by each individual partner. 2. Systemic imbalances in access to resources in different parts of the world. 3. Legacies of historic extraction of resources from one part of the world by people coming from another part of the world. 4. Continued extraction of resources from one part of the world by people coming from another part of the world. 2. Openness to multiple strategies for funding coexisting. 3. 100% transparency around funding and budgets in line with the underlying principles of NVC0 as a whole. B. Operation, I. Following the initial transition, funding weaves will likely/hopefully pop up at many different places, organizing themselves and flowing into the resources weave cluster. Funding weave/S have 4 primary functions. H2-3 1. To develop fundraising strategies and implementation structures that 7 are in alignment with our VPM and with the principles outlined in the integrated plan. 2. To collect and present data about the financial resources in NVCO. 3. To create strategic financial plans to support sustainability. 4. To support other weaves with resources and coaching about how to raise funds on all levels, for example subsidies, legacies, gifts, pledges, free gifting, fundraising activities, etc. 2. Access and participation. The purpose of this funding weave could be to support individuals and groups from marginalized communities around the world and from specific regions in the world to be able to have full access to the resources of NVCO, including the NVC0 community, and all the particular materials, training, projects, and other opportunities that exist between the two. This funding weave is likely to be tasked with a number of goals, including in particular, a campaign that would allow individuals and the organization to donate necessary resources, smartphones, generators, and whatever else is needed to communities that might otherwise not have access for lack of infrastructure support. B. Other campaigns based on needs assessed by the Access Weave. C. Allocation of the X% of funds generated by any funding weave that are automatically dedicated to supporting weaves and activities related to the Global South and marginalized communities within the Global North. Translation: the success of NVCO, and especially its success as a truly global organization, depends to a large extent on designing a system for ongoing translation of documents that reflect the following underlying principles. 1. Ease of access to information and wisdom internally. As much information and shared wisdom as possible, to as many partners as possible across the world. B. In the world, as much of the information and wisdom that we want to share with as many people as possible the world over. 2. Attention to and active care about the political state of the world. 3. Effective use of resources. NVCO and the NVCO community global, operating across many languages. In order to support the possibility of significant effects in the world, it may be vital to encourage translation weaves to emerge in support of efforts to make information and wisdom available within and outside NVCO. H2-4 108. This means acting and prioritizing based on the recognition that English became a world language through a process of colonialism and enforced globalization. This purpose might be achieved through the following preliminary mechanisms. 1. The existing translators self-organize into weaves as they see fit within the access cluster. 2. Any partner is fully empowered to ask for any document or web page to be translated. 3. The translation weave uses the modified advice process to prioritize translations. 4. The weaves responsible for resource generation and allocation consider it a priority to make resources available to the translation weave, leaving it to the weave to decide internally how to allocate such resources. H2-5 See NVC New Future Process, Integrated Plan 169 Prototyping Topic: Prototyping is a valuable mechanism for testing and evolving ideas. It has the potential to offer feedback and support learning. How will we incorporate prototyping into the new future process as we move forward? Note: a prototype is an early sample instance of something, for example, a product or process, used as a proof of concept to see how an idea works out in practice and to provide information useful in refining the concept. In the current context, we are primarily talking about creating prototype weaves, groups that would function in accordance with the principles and practices we anticipate organizational weaves using within NVCO. Considerations: Here are some considerations that have been surfaced during discussions. 1. Prototyping is likely to provide important feedback about the integrated plan. 2. Participation in prototyping could support getting it for people who learn more easily from embodied experience than from reading documents. 3. Prototyping could grow experienced practitioners who are ready to move into functioning effectively in the new organization. 4. Ideally, prototyping might both explore how individual weaves function, and also explore the functioning of interrelations between weaves. 5. It would be really desirable to involve in prototyping people from parts of the NVC network that have not been fully involved in the document development phase, such as members of the German and French-speaking NVC communities. 6. The new organization seems to be reaching towards embodying some subtle understandings about inclusion and limitations of some ways of relating to this topic. There is a desire to keep the focus on purpose while deeply caring for issues of access. Consistent with this desire, we want all prototyping activities to occur in connection with those who are caring for the new future process, that is, the INC now or the INC later, to support ensuring that prototyping activities are aligned with the larger purpose of the process. H3-1 177. Existing prototyping efforts include the Dutch pilot weave, and efforts to prototype a recognized role weave. These projects have involved Integration Council members, and have involved using the integrated plan as a reference. 8. While it seems desirable for additional prototyping to begin as soon as possible, given the desire that prototyping happen through close connection with the INC or IMC, and recognizing the limited availability of INC energy for additional projects, it may or may not end up being possible to support additional prototyping and being initiated before the IMC becomes active. 9. Because relating to prototyping was not a job that people agreed to when they agreed to join the INC, we do not want to hold getting feedback from prototyping as a prerequisite for the completion of the integration phase of the new future process. 10. Because prototyping offers such a valuable tool for learning, it may make sense to defer some aspects of implementation of the integrated plan until after they can be prototyped to learn if any changes would be desirable before more widespread implementation occurs. 11. At the same time, There are aspects of implementing the integrated plan that it will make sense to begin as soon as possible, because these items involve long lead times, or involve creating infrastructure relevant to the prototyping work, or for other reasons. For example, we believe that it will make sense to get started as soon as possible on building a virtual home, designing a legal infrastructure for the new organization, and transitioning CNVC to a new model of operating. 12. It is expected that most prototyping would be deeply rooted in the designs presented in the integrated plan. At the same time, there may be value to some prototype weaves setting out to experiment in ways that would intend to honor the spirit of the integrated plan while allowing latitude for discovering new ways of caring for the underlying intentions. The purpose of both types of prototype weaves would be to offer feedback to those improving and implementing the integrated plan. 13. The integrated plan calls for transitional partners, members of the Implementation Council, and those invited by them directly or indirectly into becoming transitional partners, to be the decision makers concerning implementation and evolution of the integrated plan. For clarity, participation in a prototype weave does not equate to being a transitional partner. The role of prototype weaves is to provide feedback to the Implementation Council and transitional partners. 14. It is likely that transitional weaves, made up of transitional partners, will focus on some primary task, and in addition, try out aspects of the integrated plan, thereby fulfilling a prototyping function in addition to other functions. Implications for Integration Council. There is no need for the Integration Council (INC) to change its plans to accommodate the desire to have prototyping occur. H3-2 Optionally, if some INC members have energy for this, they may support the formation of new prototype W3 weaves, with the understanding that these weaves will need to connect with the Implementation Council as that body becomes active. 171 Implications for Implementation Council. The Implementation Council (IMC) is asked to support the formation of prototyping initiatives, to enhance community engagement with the integrated plan, and to support acquiring meaningful feedback regarding what will support the new organization in achieving its goals. It is understood that, based on what is learned through prototyping and other modes of exploration, the IMC and transitional partners may choose to modify what is actually implemented relative to what is in the integrated plan, while attempting to hold with care the values and intentions underlying the integrated plan. The IMC is asked to seek to maintain clarity about the role of prototyping in the overall plan, and about distinctions between the role of transitional partner, which involves certain formal processes, and in roles one as a partner in decision-making, and prototyping roles, which are ultimately about providing feedback. H3-3 CNVC New Future Process, Integrated Plan 172 Supporting Weaves 1. Create a handbook for weaves, both organizational weaves and community weaves, using materials that are in the handbook section of the integrated plans. This handbook is designed to be different from an operational agreement in that it contains options and recommendations in areas for which there are no default strategies. This task includes and is not limited to the following: A. Add the social change self-reflection questions to the Weave handbook. B. Include 3 economic examples that weaves can have as a way to support creativity and experimentation with regards to money and resources. C. Include multiple paths to achieve accountability for a weave in relation to use of resources held in common. D. Include a menu of options for how to function, for example around decision-making, building on what the Integration Council has already collected in the Process to Decisions document. E. Provide weaves with the list of systems that they will need to build, with a basic idea of how each might be built that they can adopt unless they create their own. Use the outline of a living guidebook for NVC communities as a starting point. Consider how to differentiate guidelines for organizational weaves and for community weaves. F. Explore the possibility of providing some basic operating template for new groups that want to just proceed without going through a major process of figuring out how to operate. What would that be in terms of their decision-making and other systems? See http://www.cnvc.org/ric-qg. Engage with the recommendations for effectiveness in groups document to include sufficient guidelines for how to function effectively in task-oriented groups that are aiming to live in line with NVC principles. H. Create documentation about the different methods named within the structure and governance documents, with an indication of which method might be effective in which type of situation. E.g. Collaborative decision-making processes for groups. I. Explore models for group function, especially as it relates to clarity of roles, accountability, and feedback. This is because such processes are most likely to be used and to serve their intended purpose if they are deeply integrated into the way that weaves function. As a tested, well-defined model of self-management, Holacracy seems to hold promise in offering integrated strategies for supporting clarity about roles, accountability, and feedback. The Implementation Council and other early H4-1 weaves are invited to consider piloting the use of Holacracy practices, to support learning if these practices might be suitable to recommend for wider use within the organization. 2. Arrange for the availability of coaching and mentoring to support partners and organizational weaves in functioning effectively and in ways that are consistent with the OAS and with known practices for self-managed purpose-driven organizations. 3. Develop a system, agreement/processes for the creation of new organizational weaves, and to address participation in weaves. Questions that designers may want to consider include: A. What happens if someone wants to start another weave addressing the same topic area as an existing weave? B. Can a new weave be composed entirely of people who are just becoming partners? Do we want to have some mechanism to support the weave and gelling in a manner consistent with the culture of the larger organization? Perhaps have a weave coach and some extra attention to feedback. Training? C. How is membership in weaves managed? If someone wants to join an existing weave, who decides? Does the weave decide who can be a member, or is there some other principle at work? H4-2C NVC New Future Process, Integrated Plan 174 Structure and Governance Tasks 1. Decide exact details about how the internal leader and global council holder are selected initially and afterwards. 2. Develop the internal structure and functioning of each weave cluster in line with their unique functions, resources, and needs. In doing so, consider initial thoughts about structuring community interface weaves. 3. Flesh out existing operational agreements and develop additional ones as needed, including the following, which are provided in an embryonic form, as a placeholder for the Implementation Council to attend to along with refining the existing ones, and including deciding what will be OAS, what will be recommendations, menu of options, or resources. A. Processes and practices in support of all areas of functioning that are not already attended to by existing OAS, such as self-care, wellness practices, celebration, etc. B. Mechanisms for supporting weaves with the presence of coaches. See Frederick Lalow's book Reinventing Organizations, especially the discussion of the role of team coaches in the Butsorg organization, needs, effective use of resources, support for all, preservation of autonomy and responsibility. C. Mechanisms for attending to challenges with individuals that are not addressed through existing feedback and conflict resolution systems/mechanisms, including the possibility of excluding individuals from NVC 0 as a protective use of force measure. Needs, honoring the resource limitations of any group of individuals who are aiming to make anything happen. D. Mechanisms for potentially recalling people in positions of leadership. Needs, supporting the capacity of the organization to maintain its VMP and values. H5-1C NVC New Future Process, Integrated Plan 175 Establishing Systems Tasks 1. Setting up the resource generation and allocation system. A. Creating agreements for weaves wanting to generate funds that require a non-profit status. For example, what % will go to the common pool? How the relationship will be managed, etc. B. Setting up mechanisms for the budget marketplace. 2. Setting up the onboarding system. A. Develop criteria for being a partner. Some aspects of this may be addressed in other parts of the integrated plan. B. Develop criteria for learning objectives. C. Flesh out the section about NVC practice. D. Investigate the blueprint of we to incorporate elements into the inner processes part. E. Decide on transitional criteria for O roles. F. Decide how much of the O process is at the level of OAS and how much is a recommendation or left to others to do organically. G. Develop feedback criteria and processes for all specialized roles associated with the onboarding process. H. Review the onboarding process to tease out all OAS. Flesh them out and/or add others as needed in keeping with processes for OAS and the modified advice process. I. Develop mechanisms for people who go through the process to express their concerns, especially in cases when they are not welcome to the next level of the process. J. Engage with the access weave with regards to all aspects of the process being developed. 3. Setting up the conflict transformation system. A. Design and set up at least one easy access structure for each of these basic conflict transformation strategies: personal support, supported dialogue, and a group conflict transformation process. See conflict transformation for more context. H6-1, 176b. Develop practices to address conflict within meetings, for Implementation Council and in general, referencing agreements of the INC and other documents from the INC conflict subgroup. C. Consider enhancing the conflict transformation system. The INC conflict subgroup, which developed the system, had additional ideas and documentation that have not been integrated into the plan. D. Develop example agreements for weaves regarding how they intend to support addressing conflict within their weave, possibly including practices for meetings as in the last item, and possibly referencing ideas in the recommendation for effectiveness in groups chapter of the integrated plan. E. Develop a system that cares for conflict in the larger system, including NVC 0 and its partners and those outside NVCO, especially those in the community. F. Develop agreements regarding how non-mutual decisions that impact someone can occur. G. Implement places to register availability to support conflict transformation. H. Document at least one defined practice for a group conflict transformation process. I. Consider a role for ombudsman to address conflicts involving power differentials. H6-2C NVC New Future Process, Integrated Plan 177 Specific Applications Tasks Recognized Roles System 1. Design a way for the RR system to be administratively self-sufficient. 2. Select Global Role Recognition Stewardship Council Membership. 3. Mechanisms for selecting integration trustees and weave coaches. This task includes sorting out the issues related to power and privilege as they pertain to the transition from the current system of certification, and especially the way that assessors had previously been selected. Some people may want all current assessors to have a role in the future system, and others feel concerned about the implications. The full discussion about it was shared with me, Gianthi, and Roxy, and some part of it is preserved in the RAW Implementation Council notes. 4. Steps to creating a self-activated RR weave. Flexibility in how often it meets, 2x year. How it may merge with other well-established community weaves. Fluidity of what weave I get my renewal with if I move, change themes, to stay with current feedback. 5. Scenario Q/A. Well-established community. How to convert/integrate RR process into our community. 6. Scenario Q/A. Why not have self-activated weaves be temporary? To receive ongoing support and encouragement. Feedback is one manifestation of that. Empathy. Resources systems also manifestation. 7. New label for recognized roles. Integration roles. Integration map/location/guide. Integration process versus certification process. Recognized integration roles. 8. Menu of options for approved titles for ambassadors to choose from learning events. Tasks 1. Establish mechanisms for selection of NT trainers and figure out what to do with NT resource team that's been established by the board while the Integration Council was in operation. 2. Consider whether centralized administration of NTS from within the US is fully consistent with principles of attending to power and privilege, and engage collaboratively with CNVC if any H7-1 change is desired, so that relevant information about the tasks involved with potentially changing the existing mechanism can be studied thoroughly. 178 Social Change and Pacer Building Tasks 1. Review suggestions for forms put on Virtual Home. 2. Role of moderators. Figure out resources to sustain these positions if not volunteers. H7-2C NVC New Future Process, Integrated Plan 179 Creating Access Tasks. Establishing an initial access weave. The following is the list of functions that the integrated plan calls for the access cluster to attend to. One of the tasks of the Implementation Council is to devise a method by which these functions will be attended to by an initial access weave. 1. Reviewing proposals and making new proposals every year. 2. Giving feedback on other projects throughout the network. Being available to other groups for consultation on issues of access. 3. Mapping the centers of NVC activity in the world and their relationships to each other, perhaps in collaboration with the community interface weaves or other weaves committed to community building across the new organization. Conducting needs surveys and interviews with people in underserved areas. Asking folks on the margins what kinds of support they need. Collating responses and posting them on the website. 4. Coordinating translation of NVC materials and house translated materials for free on the NVC 0 website. Asking funding weaves to help find ways to fund translation. 5. Working with funding weaves to assess whether locally raised funds are kept in local communities. For example, for entities held in the Global South, a portion from international participants' fees could be sent to NVC 0, but income from local participants' fees would stay in the community and be earmarked for people without much access to resources. 6. Exploring access for those with different ways of learning beyond cultural/linguistic challenges. For example, exploring ways to share NVC with people who've been impacted by war trauma or life trauma. Also, researching atypical ways people show up in local contexts and coming up with options or recommendations. For example, what do people with Asperger's find most supportive in learning NVC compared to neurotypical folks? And polling the general public what's been most supportive in learning NVC, and harvesting best practices geared to specific groups of learners. 7. Working with the recognized roles weave on developing curricula regarding rank and privilege. H8-1 188. Organizing opportunities for networking and continuing education amongst NVC folks working with people on the margins. Creating regular ways to meet, whether in person or on the phone, to discuss the evolution of NVC in different contexts. Creating systems for continuously engaging our understanding of what NVC is and how best to share it to support inclusion of different cultural viewpoints and practices. 9. Organizing classes and conferences, organizing a global conference on sharing NVC in non-traditional ways, with the location of the conference alternating between Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Addressing other barriers to access for participants attending these conferences such as visa requirements, language assistance, travel costs. B. Alternatively, if more time was needed to organize a standalone conference, developing workshops on power, privilege, and social location to be offered at NVC 0 global conferences. C. High priority, hosting a quarterly 2-hour call for anyone interested in discussing how to adapt NVC to local contexts/culture. Legitimizing different ways of sharing NVC by naming them. That is, when the form is different, it's often labeled not pure NVC, but when the principles of NVC are taught in ways that are more culturally relevant, it can be seen as even more true to the spirit of NVC. D. Offering a 6-week tell series where people talk about how they are sharing NVC in non-traditional ways. How to do stealth NVC single quote by engaging in work such as income generation projects that are based on a community's self-identified needs rather than being trauma-driven. This kind of social engagement bypasses biases and restrictions as NVC practitioners offer a service rather than offer a teaching. 10. Stemming from these classes and conferences, producing position papers regarding the evolution of NVC in diverse social contexts to enrich the theory and applicability of NVC worldwide. Creating materials and procedures to contextualize other key differentiations and principles in NVC. For example, how to phrase requests in culturally meaningful ways. Not importing assumptions from Western society. B. Creating a searchable database on current projects around the world where NVC is used in context, not just taught on its own. For example, Sort for All community development projects in Northern Africa. A way for people in the Global North to learn about how NVC is being contextualized in the Global South, facilitating the flow of experience and expertise running from South to North. Possible ways to meet needs for learning, growth, inspiration. 11. Create a list of examples of barriers to access from different parts of the world, both in general and within currently existing NVC communities. H8-2, 12. Develop criteria for selecting the access cluster representative to the Global Council as well as ongoing evaluation of the success of the strategy of the access presence on the Global Council. 13. Identify and attend to issues of power and privilege within NVCO, including in particular places where there are potential gatekeepers. The Creating Access plan specifically included. We would like attention paid to examining when functional tasks result in unintentional gatekeeping, which we define as key positions, and to ensure that those positions are representative of the various communities worldwide. Some specific aspects of this task may include attending to methods for selection of people for other key positions, such as integration trustees and Weave coaches 2. Trainers for NTS 3. Weave coaches for general functioning 4. Onboarding roles B. Fleshing out aspects of the structure and functioning, including in particular the Global Council. 14. Reflect on how to best attend to this aspect of the Creating Access plan. We are concerned that in any weave, there will be folks with privilege, perhaps because of the length of time they've been training in NVC settings, because of age, gender, facility with English, etc. Those folks may have more power to have their opinions matter in the weave, and to shape the direction in which the weave moves. We want to honor and utilize the expertise that people might have that is specific to NVC. At the same time, we want to hold awareness that many times people have got into a position of having that expertise because of the privilege that they bear, privilege that insulates them from an awareness of other aspects of society and challenges that other groups face. We want to create agreements that will enable those who might not have the privilege to have as extensive an NVC background to still have their concerns be heard and addressed in the new organization. Without clear attention paid to the operational agreements under which weaves conduct business, and without clarity about the structural organization of the weaves, there may be someone with either structural power. For example, is the representative to the Global Council someone with structural power in the weave, or privilege who is in a de facto key position in a way that could limit the ability of those with less privilege to have their voices matter. We are advocating for clear operational agreements that address ways to ensure that all voices are truly equal, and in those moments when a subgroup of people are chosen to make decisions within a weave or to shape the direction of actions in a weave, that there is equal access to those positions regardless of privilege. When we say equal, we don't mean that everyone necessarily has identical influence, but that the pattern of influence does not default to reflecting historical patterns of privilege. H8-3-15. Work out a system and mechanisms for continuing to increase the presence of global Sioux and other underserved communities to majority global South until the access issues are fully resolved in the world. That is, no group's needs are prioritized and resources fully flow from where they are to where they are needed all over the world. This includes actual details of geographic, socio-economic representation on the Global Council, while also continuing to increase the proportion of Europeans relative to North Americans. 16. Identify criteria for people in weaves who will hold awareness about access, and any agreements regarding their role, and identify criteria regarding integration of access awareness whether via an access person or by other means. Note, there probably aren't enough people who know NVC and have a critical awareness to populate each weave with at least one. So we probably need to invite people who don't know NVC, but are open to learning, and who have a strong critical awareness. We recognize that this is inconsistent with criteria written elsewhere in the plan, for example, that partners have an integrated practice of NVC, and we leave this as a task for the Implementation Council to resolve. 17. Work with the Global Role Recognition Stewardship Council (GRRSC) to ensure that anyone who wants to take on a recognized role is not prevented from doing it because of issues of resources. For example, review the resource allocation plans of RR weaves to ensure they are not subtly preventing access. 18. Review and amend the design of the onboarding process for partners to ensure that access issues are identified as early as possible. Some preliminary strategies are included in the onboarding process document. Some issues to address: A. The potential barriers and patterns of privilege and how prospective partners might find sponsoring individuals and weaves. B. The potential for criteria for partners subtly reflecting norms emerging from patterns of privilege. C. The potential for patterns of privilege skewing who is available to take on specialized roles within the system. 19. Provide human resource support for under-resourced weaves to attend to any strategic and administrative tasks or anything else needed to launch a successful weave, such as A. Creating budgets. B. Forming business plans or equivalent. C. Writing grant proposals. D. Navigating legal issues. E. etc. H8-4 Additional tasks identified before integration with CORG. The following proposed actions for the initial access weave and subsequently the access cluster came from the work of SGWG. There may be overlap between these and tasks mentioned earlier, since full integration at the level of implementation tasks was never done within the Integration Council. 1. During the first year of this weave's existence, develop procedures for attending to issues of privilege that are present in the organization. During this year and thereafter, monitor what is happening within NVC 0, both the NVC 0 community and NVC 0, the organization, from the perspective of exposing and transforming dynamics of privilege within the organization. 2. Provide ongoing guidance, leadership, and support, including ongoing requests for resources, regarding attention and proactive support to the Global South until such time that the project of populating the community interface weave structure around the globe is complete, at which point the relevant sections of that structure can take on the necessary advocacy for such needs. This includes being proactive in reaching out to members of these communities to raise awareness of the weave's existence and availability for support. Identify people and organizations in those communities which are doing this work, with awareness that traditional outreach efforts may be insufficient to identify and reach all these people, and develop strategies for maintaining contact and ongoing dialogue with those folks. Because of language barriers and limitations on access to technology and resources, it may be especially essential to find multiple ways to reach out to these groups. 3. Propose new actions and participate in and/or invite others to participate in taking them. Invite interested parties to consider how NVC 0 might want to engage, globally, with overall efforts to transform relations of domination between the Global North and the Global South, and within the Global North. What is unique that an NVC perspective can offer? What are unique practices that NVC can bring to already existing attempts? Etc. B. Establishing new funding weaves for particular functions such as supporting the existence of NTS and strategic locations in the Global South Sea. Conducting research projects on various topics. D. Creating training materials and providing training on these topics in the Global North. E. Gather the wisdom already existing among people working in areas outside where NVC was developed and ensure that the understanding of NVC is responsive to and inclusive of this wisdom. Create resources for sharing NVC that attend to the differences in cultures and ways the principles of NVC are filtered through various cultural contexts. Share these resources with those sharing NVC in local contexts. F. Continue to explore and develop plans for attending to the complexities related to the intersection between NVC and local cultures around the world, including, for example, how NVC can be both a threat to and also reinforce authority-based behaviors. H8-5 4. Propose new OAs to build on and expand beyond what's already spelled out in the operational agreements document, such as 184A. Create guidelines for selection of people into leadership positions. B. Develop specific guidelines for conflict resolution OAs that are attentive to power differences. C. Specific guidelines for engaging with marginalized communities and individuals anchored in these communities. D. Request to community interface weaves, especially in segregated or polarized regions, that one of their roles is specifically to encourage NVC practitioners locally to reach out to currently marginalized communities for purposes such as greater connection, support with NVC skills, and growing capacity to do their work effectively. 5. Be available to consult with other weaves as they encounter challenges in implementing the OAs and in overall attending to issues of access and privilege. 6. Proactively work with weaves responsible for the management and evolution of the work that NVC 0 does in the world, such as the Recognized Roles Program, Project Initiation and Implementation, and others, to support a transition from training-focused, workshop culture activities to project-based, community-focused and relationship-oriented ones in order to reach communities that don't operate within a workshop/formal educational culture. 7. Attend to the question of language considerations for organizational weave meetings to identify resources and methods for having multilingual meetings. While this may be most acute at the level of the Global Council, the same issue may rise at any weave. Additional tasks identified by the CNVC Transition Task Force. The CNVC Task Force had registered a concern that, in the long run, it is desirable to remove any structural bias towards certification administration being handled in the U.S. Remove any structural bias towards NTS being managed from within the U.S. The transitional configuration for CNVC is acknowledged as continuing to favor these sort of biases. Once the transitional configuration has been achieved, so that the functions have proven their ability to be performed within the self-management model, the next step will be to make whatever structural adjustments are needed so that the weaves associated with certification and NT functions need not remain anchored in the U.S. integrating access into resource management and allocation within 1 year. H8-6 1. Create ways to pay for the translation of NVC materials in different languages. 185 2. Figure out ways for people from unserved parts of the world and communities to be able to participate in global conventions regardless of where they are. Have funds set aside. 3. Attend to the question of who makes decisions about priorities regarding resources. This is absolutely key, because there needs to be some mechanism to create such priorities for any resources that flow towards another weave or region, and yet none of us want a centralized decision-making body. 4. Decide on the percent of funds raised that any funding weave sets aside for a general fund for attending to resource disparities. See Creating Access OAs document. Integrating access into specific applications. The following is the list of actions and decisions that the Creating Access Working Group identified for each of several application areas. One of the tasks of the Implementation Council is to identify mechanisms for operationalizing and for the principles and guidelines that have been identified as attending to issues of power and privilege within the existing NVC community and within the world at large. Recognized roles system within 1 year. 1. Review all tasks below for terminology and for whether they are already covered elsewhere. 2. Look at this list and see what is covered. What the Global Role Recognition Stewardship Council (GRRSC) can take on. What individual weaves need to know through onboarding or handbook or feedback process. 3. Track NVC practitioners who are not currently certified even though they are actively training people. 4. Raise awareness amongst trainers of contextualized NVC practices throughout the world. 5. Create dynamic training for integration trustees so that they understand the impact of their structural power and how it plays out in the recognized role process and in their relationship with prospective practitioners and ambassadors. 6. Assess trainers' readiness to share NVC with people in diverse contexts. Educate trainers to understand their social location, how their actions and attitudes meet or don't meet needs for trust, belonging and community in the type of relationships they form with people across social divides. 7. By increasing awareness of not just cultural differences but the concepts of target/agent groups, high status/low status, power and privilege, we believe this would support the principle of decentering, so that the particular culture of those with more power isn't by default considered to be the right way and the culture of those in marginalized groups considered the wrong way. For example, the term cisgender makes visible the process of genderization and how it creates a system of rank and privilege, revealing the blind spots of those who have not had to question that gender assigned to them at birth. H8-7, 186, 8. Develop a clear structure in which prospective NVC integration ambassadors, formally certified trainers, would take part in training on issues of power/oppression as part of their path towards that recognized role. Current certified trainers would also complete this process as part of the periodic feedback they receive. The training would be done by someone with personal experience of having lived/navigated the experience of being a person with less privilege/power. 9. Create willingness to have the recognized role process certification be responsive to individual needs. Find ways to make the process easier for people who are already doing this work for many years, especially if they are working with people on the margins and/or are themselves from the margins. 10. Fast-track or facilitate mentorship for people working in countries without much support or community. Doing outreach and recognizing that requesting support is challenging due to cultural/class/caste/gender barriers. Aspirational. 1. Increase the awareness of current trainers and leaders in the NVC community into an understanding and embodiment of anti-oppression work, especially work relevant to the cultures in which they work. 2. Structure our understanding/framing of NVC so that it creates opportunities for consciousness raising/helping people see outside the box they are in by virtue of societal position. 3. Work in countries where existing political processes/authority or cultural norms are inconsistent with having recognized roles. Create mechanisms for whole communities to take on recognized roles. 4. Facilitate connections between trainers in North America/Europe/Australia/New Zealand and outside of those centers of power. 5. Regarding developing a curriculum on power, privilege, and social location for use in peer feedback in recognized roles, community weaves, and in ongoing feedback regarding recognized roles, this needs to be done in collaboration with our group, and it's not clear now who is handling this. 6. We would like attention paid to examining when functional tasks result in unintentional gatekeeping, which we define as key positions, to ensure that those positions are representative of the various communities worldwide. There was a comment to come back to this with regards to certification. Training and learning events within 1 year. 1. Encourage trainers to offer 1 week per year of pro bono work and list their availability on a web-based directory that can be accessed by groups in underserved areas around the world. H8-8 Create a collection of emails accessible to trainers. The directory would address favoritism/support given to those who aren't already well known. 2. Currently only certified trainers are asked to teach at NTs. Hire non-certified trainers with training experience who already understand issues faced by underserved populations. Aspirational. 1. Develop strategies to share NVC with folks who don't have access. Less text-based teaching, in corporate movement, drama, art, etc. create a lot of room for other strategies, such as shifting the percentages of time spent in other learning forms and the time spent in traditional educational forms. 2. Encourage trainers who support the recognized role process to include people who have financial and/or cultural barriers to attend related trainings. 3. Find resources to support the work of trainers who are directly increasing access. Social change and pace building within 1 year. 1. Develop an online questionnaire or conduct interviews with people engaged in social change work around the world to inquire into their needs, rather than anticipating what they need and offer it to them. Post the results online. Showcase their projects on the website. Aspirational. 1. Develop relationships with social change movements we are interested in supporting, and use NVC as a way to support the movement, through organizational or systemic support, not as an educational tool. Community within 1 year. 1. We endorse the Community WG's proposal to create a toolkit or a resource kit for individuals and communities when they are first introduced to NVC, so that they can continue to explore and build relevance for NVC in their community. 2. Reaching out to individuals who are currently or interested in working with people in the margins, contexts where there are people who don't have as much access to economic resources, working without much support, especially people who are reaching out to share NVC with those who are not represented in the majority of the NVC community, people working in the global south and/or people in the margins in terms of race/gender/class/caste. 3. Create a regular, ongoing teleclass where folks can call to get support for challenges related to rank and privilege they are witnessing or experiencing in their NVC community. May include empathy for those who've quit and for ourselves as leaders, our own blinders and losses. H8-9, 188. 4. Create a handout or highlight on the NVC Zero website a link for people to request support with educating others around issues of access, such as an access hotline akin to a How's My Driving number. 5. Facilitate partnerships between sister communities where one community makes a specific commitment with accountability to an emerging community or community with few material resources who is needing support. 6. Get feedback from folks who have left NVC community or create a feedback form that supports trainers to understand cultural environment issues. The completed form to be collected by the Access Weave instead of the individual trainer in case there's a lack of trust of trainer. Feedback accessible to other trainers for learning purposes. Aspirational. 1. Generate ideas of which groups we see as not being represented, who's not in the room in present giraffe circles. Identify whose voices are not included in the global dialogue. Assess barriers to participation, such as access to childcare, and explore strategies for more inclusion. Brainstorm ways to reach out to involve people in this process. 2. Develop community-building resource material, how to create a climate that invites people to stay. H8-10 CNVC New Future Process, Integrated Plan. 189 Miscellaneous 1. Work in conjunction with authors of core commitments and matrix to integrate power and privilege into their respective frameworks. 2. Review the integrated plan to see if there are any decisions that require new operational agreements that haven't been tracked. 3. Depending on how plans develop regarding the legal underpinnings of NVCO, it may be necessary to investigate options with regard to a legal entity other than CNVC offering NTS. By way of background, with the Rosenberg gift of 2012, the Rosenbergs granted to CNVC, but not to any successor organization, the right to use intellectual property claimed by the Rosenbergs in relation to the offering of NTS, and the right to use Marshall's name and image in promoting these offerings. Intellectual property lawyers consulted by the CNVC board at the time had advised that Rosenberg claims to owning intellectual property necessary to the offering of NTS would be unlikely to hold up under legal scrutiny if matters got into a court, but that nonetheless it was certainly better not to turn the matter into a legal dispute if this could be avoided. There didn't seem to be an opportunity to discuss legal doubts with the Rosenbergs at the time, and the gracious gift of the Rosenbergs seemingly eliminated any need for further discussion. There was no disagreement with the right of the Rosenbergs to give or withhold permission for High's name and likeness to be used promotionally. During the transition period of CNVC functionality being incorporated into NVCO, the plan is for CNVC to continue as a legal entity, and this arrangement would seem to ensure that the Rosenberg gift continues to allow for the offering of NTS and the use of Marshall's name and likeness without a likelihood of legal challenge. However, in the longer term, if there ends up being a desire to phase out CNVC as a legal entity and yet still offer NTS, the legal and relationship with Valentina Rosenberg. Implications of this would need to be investigated. Even if NVC is retained as a legal entity, but subsumed into NVCO, it may be desirable to attend to any relationship issues that might be stimulated by this arrangement. 4. Bioregions and ecoregions. A background. During the initial phases of the work, the Structure and Governance Working Group explored the possibility of organizing according to bioregions or ecoregions, which would be more consistent with our vision and with the principles of our structure. The reason for this was based on the understanding that organizing by countries, which are ratified by the UN, is at odds with the aspect of our work that H9-190 focuses on supporting the transition from authority-based to collaborative systems, since current political structures are all authority-based. In the end, the entire project of geographic organizing, whether by country or not, was transformed into the current Community Interface Weave cluster, which has no particular guidelines about how to organize, except to use geography as their basis. B. The overall conclusion at the time, in the summer of 2015, was that the level of maturity of bio and eco-regionalism was inconsistent across the globe, and not sufficient to support organizational clarity. In particular, the crossover between bioregionalism and politics is in its infancy. So much so, that even dedicating further resources to continuing to explore this seemed inconsistent with the level of resources available to the NFP at the time. C. That first step would be a thorough exploration of the pros and cons of organizing geographical weaves according to eco or bioregions, which would be an essential conversation to have before deciding whether or not to adopt this strategy. Instead, because of the deep appeal and lack of information and maturity, the Implementation Council could consider inviting weaves, especially any that organize geographically, to continue to explore the topic within their areas, and, in particular, that countries examine their local conditions and decide for themselves whether or not their local conditions are sufficient for bio and eco-regional organizing to be feasible. D. Another option might be to invite the formation of a weave of interested people to continue to explore further the possibility of bioregions or ecoregions serving as the foundation for certain forms of organizing. Here are some possible entry points. I. For bioregions, http://www.worldwildlife.org/science/wildfinder/. The limitation of bioregions is that the mappings available are often only focused on species conservation. 2. For ecoregions, https://www.epa.gov/eco-research/ecoregions. Ecoregions hold a lot of promise, in that they take into consideration everything about a region's capacities, geography, human activity, similarities within and differences from other areas, and more. The difficulty here is that this kind of mapping is only available in small parts of the world, and not consistently across regions. 3. http://www.worldwildlife.org/biome-categories/terrestrial-ecoregions. 4. http://www.worldwildlife.org/publications/terrestrial-ecoregions-OF-the-world v. http://wwf.panda.org/about